He bought the house hoping for a quiet life, but what he discovered beneath the stairs revealed a disturbing truth. This place was never meant for living. It was meant for disappearing. Who created it, and what role does this house really play? Watch till the end, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you would do in his place. The decision to buy the house did not come from enthusiasm or ambition, it came from exhaustion. Daniel had reached a point where continuing his life exactly as it was felt heavier than any risk associated with change. For years he had lived according to schedules, deadlines, quarterly reports, and carefully worded emails. He had learned to measure his days in productivity and silence, in meetings where nothing was said directly, in agreements that dissolved the moment they were signed. When the job finally ended, not with a dramatic dismissal, but with a mutual understanding that neither side had anything left to offer the other, he felt no anger, only emptiness. He told himself that the house was an investment, that it was practical, that property in quiet areas always appreciated. But beneath those explanations was a simpler truth. He wanted distance. Distance from the city, from people who knew his routines, from a version of himself that had learned to disappear in plain sight. He wanted a place where the days would slow down, where time would feel physical again, measured in light moving across rooms and the sound of footsteps on wood. The listing appeared almost by accident. A large American house in a quiet residential area, priced noticeably below market value. The photographs showed a wide facade, clean lines, a symmetrical front porch, and tall windows that suggested space rather than luxury. Inside, the rooms were generous but restrained, more functional than ornate. The staircase stood out immediately, rising from the center of the main hall in a broad, confident curve, as if it had been designed to anchor the entire structure. Daniel noticed the price before anything else. It was low enough to feel wrong, but not so low as to scream danger. He ran the numbers twice, then a third time, expecting to find an error. There was none. The house had been on the market for a short period, not long enough to suggest serious issues, yet long enough that the price had already been adjusted downward once. The realtor responded quickly. Too quickly, Daniel thought. Their conversation was efficient, almost rehearsed. The house was available for viewing immediately. The owners were motivated to sell. There were no structural problems, no known legal complications, no dramatic history. The phrase "ideal for privacy" came up more than once, framed as a selling point rather than a warning. When Daniel arrived to see the house in person, it was early afternoon. The sun was high, casting clean, sharp light across the quiet street. The neighborhood felt suspended in time, neither abandoned nor lively, a place where people lived but did not intrude on one another. Lawns were trimmed, cars were parked neatly in driveways, and there was an almost deliberate absence of movement. The front door opened smoothly. Inside, the house smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood. The air was cool and dry, regulated with precision. Light poured in through tall windows, illuminating the hardwood floors and the wide central hall. The staircase dominated the space, its steps broad and solid, the railing polished but understated. Daniel paused there longer than he expected, looking up and then down, noting how the structure seemed heavier than necessary, more substantial than a staircase usually needed to be. The realtor talked, filling the silence with details about square footage, renovations, and neighborhood statistics. Daniel listened politely but found his attention drifting. There was nothing overtly wrong with the house. That, strangely, was what unsettled him. Everything felt prepared, curated to the point of sterility. The furniture was minimal, placed to suggest scale rather than comfort. Personal items were almost non-existent. No family photographs, no clutter, no marks of prolonged living. He walked through the rooms methodically. The kitchen was modern but not new, upgraded recently enough to justify its condition, but not recently enough to raise questions. The bedrooms upstairs were empty, clean, and neutral. The bathrooms showed signs of recent use, but only just. It was as if someone had lived here carefully, intentionally leaving as little trace as possible. The basement door was closed. When Daniel asked about it, the realtor answered smoothly, explaining that it was a standard storage space, unfinished, nothing remarkable. There was no suggestion to open it, and Daniel did not insist. He told himself he was being cautious, not curious. The seller arrived near the end of the viewing. He was a man in his late 50s, perhaps early 60s, dressed simply, almost anonymously. He shook Daniel's hand firmly but briefly, his eyes moving constantly, scanning the house as if checking for something left behind. He spoke little, answering questions without elaboration, never volunteering information. When the conversation turned to timing, the seller was direct. He wanted the deal completed quickly. There was flexibility on the price, he said, as long as the process moved forward without delays. Inspections were acceptable, but limited. Certain areas of the house, particularly non-essential structural spaces, were to be sold as is. Daniel noted the phrasing, non-essential structural spaces. He asked what that meant exactly, and the seller shrugged, deferring to the realtor, who repeated the explanation about storage areas and older constructions that did not impact living conditions. The paperwork confirmed what had been said. The title was clean. The ownership history showed several transfers over the past 2 decades, more than average, but not unheard of. Each owner had held the property for a relatively short time, though none had sold at a loss. It was as if the house passed through hands without attaching itself to anyone. Daniel hesitated only once, late at night, reviewing the documents again. He told himself that hesitation was natural, that any significant purchase carried doubt. In the end, he signed. The closing process was completed in less than 3 weeks. No complications arose. Funds transferred smoothly. Keys were handed over without ceremony. The seller left town the same day, according to the realtor, who seemed relieved when the transaction was finalized. Daniel moved in gradually. He brought only what he needed: a bed, a desk, a few boxes of clothes and books. He slept on a mattress on the floor the first night. The house around him unnervingly quiet. The silence was deep, insulated, as if the walls absorbed sound rather than reflecting it. Over the next few days, he began settling into routines. Morning coffee by the front window, evenings spent unpacking or planning minor repairs. He walked the perimeter of the property, noting the boundaries, the placement of trees, the distance to neighboring houses. One neighbor waved from across the street but did not approach. Another watched briefly from behind a curtain and disappeared. As Daniel started inspecting the house more closely, small details began to stand out. The ventilation system was unusually efficient, maintaining consistent airflow throughout the house. The electrical layout around the staircase area was denser than expected, with access panels placed neatly but oddly positioned. When he walked beneath the staircase, the sound of his footsteps changed subtly, becoming duller, more muted. He dismissed these observations at first. Older houses had quirks. Renovations layered systems on top of systems. There was nothing inherently alarming about over-engineering. Still, when he leaned against the wall beneath the stairs one afternoon, measuring space for potential storage, he felt it. A difference in resistance. The wood paneling flexed almost imperceptibly under pressure, as if it concealed more than framing behind it. Daniel stepped back and studied the staircase again. The way it sat within the house, the way the space beneath it was enclosed more carefully than necessary. He told himself he was imagining things, projecting meaning where none existed. That evening, he made a note in his phone. Inspect understair area. Not urgently, just something to look into when he had time. At that moment, it felt like nothing more than a practical task, one more item on a growing list of home improvements. He had no reason yet to believe that the house was anything other than what it appeared to be: a quiet place, sold cheaply, waiting to be occupied. What Daniel did not know, standing alone in the fading light of the main hall, was that the house had already begun to test him. Not with fear or mystery, but with something far more dangerous, with the illusion that everything made sense and that nothing required immediate attention. The staircase remained silent. The space beneath it waited. The note Daniel had made about the space beneath the staircase stayed with him longer than he expected. It did not feel like curiosity in the usual sense. It was closer to irritation, the kind that came from noticing something slightly out of alignment and being unable to forget it. Each time he passed through the main hall, his eyes returned to the same section of wall, to the quiet corner where the staircase descended and the light never quite reached. He told himself there was no hurry. Houses always revealed their oddities slowly, and rushing into unnecessary modifications often led to mistakes. Still, the feeling persisted. Not dread, not excitement, but the steady awareness that something there did not conform to the logic of the rest of the house. He began with small, reasonable steps. One afternoon, he knelt beneath the staircase with a flashlight and examined the wood paneling more closely. The craftsmanship was good, too good for a purely decorative enclosure. The seams between panels were unusually precise, and the trim ran uninterrupted, as though it served a structural purpose rather than hiding empty space. When he tapped along the surface, the sound changed subtly as his knuckles moved from one section to another. Most of the wall responded with a hollow echo typical of framed interiors. One area, however, returned a deeper, more solid tone. Daniel straightened and stood back, studying the staircase from a distance. From this angle, the weight of it became more apparent. The steps were thick, reinforced, their underside concealed with a care that seemed excessive. The house itself was solid, but nothing else in it felt overbuilt. Only this. He retrieved a level and ran it along the paneling. The alignment was exact. No warping, no settling. Whatever lay behind the wall had been planned, not added later as an afterthought. That realization unsettled him more than the idea of hidden storage ever could. People hid things out of necessity or paranoia. They designed systems for purpose. The next step was unavoidable. Daniel fetched a screwdriver from the toolbox he had brought with him and began removing the trim piece closest to the floor. The screws came away cleanly, without resistance, as though they had been turned many times before. Behind the trim was not insulation or framing, but a smooth wooden edge, finished and sealed. He paused. The house was silent around him. No hum from appliances, no distant traffic noise, only the faint sound of air moving through vents. He placed his hand against the panel and applied gentle pressure. It shifted slightly, just enough to confirm that it was not fixed in place. The panel did not open outward. Instead, it slid inward with a controlled, weighted motion, revealing a dark opening where the wall had been. The air that escaped was cool and dry, carrying no smell of mold or earth. It smelled, disturbingly, like conditioned indoor air. Daniel stepped back instinctively. The opening was larger than he had anticipated, wide enough to walk through without crouching. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the top of a staircase descending into darkness. Not a ladder, not a narrow crawl space, a proper staircase, its steps evenly spaced and disappearing downward at a steady angle. For several seconds, he simply stood there, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew about the house. There was no mention of additional levels in the documentation, no indication of a substructure of this size. The realization that such a significant space could exist unnoticed beneath the house made his chest tighten. His first thought was practical. He reached for his phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it downward. The beam illuminated the first few steps. They were wooden, solid, with non-slip strips along the edges. The craftsmanship matched the rest of the house, perhaps even exceeded it. The railing on one side was smooth, sturdy, clearly designed to support weight. Daniel checked his phone signal, still present, though weaker. He placed a small object at the threshold of the opening, marking his position, then took one step down. The temperature dropped slightly as he descended. The air remained fresh, circulated. Each step was firm beneath his feet, silent except for the soft sound of his shoes against wood. He counted them without meaning to. 10, 15, 20. The staircase extended farther than he had expected, deep enough that the light from above faded quickly. He stopped halfway down and turned, looking back up. The opening above framed a rectangle of brightness, the familiar shape of his home reduced to something distant and abstract. For the first time since moving in, he felt a genuine sense of vulnerability. Not fear of the dark, but the awareness of being somewhere he had not chosen to be. Continuing downward, he noticed small details that confirmed this was no abandoned or neglected space. The walls were clean. The wiring was concealed within narrow channels, secured and labeled. Ventilation grills were placed at regular intervals, barely audible in operation. Whoever had built this had done so recently or had maintained it meticulously. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a short corridor. The walls here were reinforced, thicker than the standard interior construction. A door stood at the end, flush with the wall, its surface padded, its edges sealed with dense rubber lining. It was not locked. Daniel hesitated again, then reached out and pushed. The door opened smoothly without a sound. The room beyond was lit softly, the light activating as soon as he crossed the threshold. It was not large, but it was not cramped either. The proportions were deliberate, balanced. The walls were lined with sound-dampening panels, their texture subtle, almost decorative. A single chair sat against one wall. A small table stood opposite it. The floor was clean, unmarred. This was no storage room. Daniel walked slowly around the perimeter, absorbing what he saw. There were no windows, no visible means of escape other than the staircase he had descended. The lighting came from recessed fixtures in the ceiling, controlled by a panel near the door. He tested it cautiously. The lights dimmed and brightened smoothly, responding to preset levels rather than manual switches. In one corner, he noticed a small access door. Behind it was a compact bathroom, complete with a sink, a toilet, and a shower stall. Everything was functional, clean, and unused in appearance, though not new. It was as if the room had been reset carefully after its last occupant. The implications of that thought settled heavily on him. He returned to the main room and stood still, listening. The soundproofing was effective. The world above might as well not have existed. He spoke a single word aloud, quietly just to test it. The sound seemed to disappear almost immediately, swallowed by the walls. This was not a space meant to be visited briefly. Daniel's instincts urged him to document everything. He took photographs, recorded short videos, noting measurements, details, anything that might later help him understand what this place was and why it existed. As he worked, his earlier rational explanations began to unravel. There was nothing accidental about this construction, nothing improvised. When he returned upstairs, sealing the panel behind him, the house felt different. The main hall seemed larger, emptier, as though something had been removed from it, even though nothing visible had changed. He stood at the base of the staircase and placed his hand against the wall again. It was solid, unremarkable, hiding its secret perfectly. That night, Daniel slept poorly. His mind replayed the descent again and again, the feeling of stepping into a space that was both part of his home and entirely separate from it. He considered calling a contractor, an inspector, someone to explain what he had found. But he hesitated. Once other people knew, control would leave his hands. In the morning, he made a decision that surprised him with its calmness. He would return to the space below. Not out of fear and not out of excitement, but because understanding it was now necessary. The house had revealed something it did not want noticed easily, and Daniel, whether by chance or design, had noticed it. Daniel waited until the house settled into its morning stillness before returning to the hidden staircase. He did not want to associate the descent with exhaustion or imagination. If he was going to understand what lay beneath his home, it had to be done with a clear mind, in daylight, when every rational explanation still felt possible. He prepared carefully, not dramatically. Gloves, a flashlight with fresh batteries, his phone fully charged. He left a note on the kitchen counter with the date and time, not because he expected something to happen, but because order had always been his way of keeping anxiety at bay. Only after these small rituals did he slide the panel aside and step once more into the opening beneath the stairs. The descent felt different this time. Less shocking, more deliberate. His body remembered the steps, the slight drop in temperature, the quiet hum of air moving through unseen channels. What had startled him the night before now revealed itself more clearly. The staircase was not simply well built. It was engineered. Every angle, every material choice served a purpose. This was not the work of a homeowner with a secret hobby. It had been planned, measured, and executed by someone who understood systems. At the bottom, he paused before the padded door, listening. There was nothing to hear, and that absence itself felt intentional. When he pushed the door open and the lights came on automatically, he noted the timing. Immediate, but not abrupt. Designed to feel neutral. He moved through the room slowly, this time with the intent to catalog rather than react. The walls were covered with acoustic panels disguised as minimalist decor. They were not industrial or crude. Someone had taken care to make the space feel ordinary, even comfortable, without allowing it to feel personal. The floor was smooth, easy to clean, without rugs or textures that would hold dust or traces of use. Daniel knelt and ran a gloved hand along the baseboards. Clean. No debris. No sign of neglect. He opened a small cabinet built flush into the wall and found neatly stacked, sealed packages, bedding sets, towels, toiletries. All generic, all unbranded. Nothing that could tie the room to a specific person or time. He opened another compartment and found bottled water arranged in careful rows. Not emergency rations, not survival supplies. Just enough for a short stay. He counted without realizing it. Enough for several days, but not weeks. The bathroom confirmed his growing impression. The fixtures were modest but modern. The shower drain was clean, the sealant fresh. This was not a forgotten space. It had been maintained, perhaps even serviced regularly. Someone had been here recently, or someone expected someone to be. The lighting control panel caught his attention next. It was more complex than he had initially noticed. Preset modes were labeled simply day, night, rest, off. Each setting adjusted not only brightness but color temperature, mimicking the passage of time. Daniel tested them one by one, watching the room shift subtly from warm to cool. The effect was disorienting in a way that felt deliberate. This was not just a room to hide in. It was a room designed to remove a person from the outside world without drawing attention to their absence. The thought settled heavily on him. Daniel returned to the main area and noticed a narrow door he had overlooked before, concealed almost perfectly within the paneling. Behind it was a compact technical closet. Inside, he found the heart of the room's function. Filters labeled with dates, power units humming softly, backup batteries. A network of cables routed with precision, tagged and organized. Someone had built this to operate independently for limited periods. Not permanently, not indefinitely, just long enough. He noticed something else then, something small but deeply unsettling. One of the power indicators was warm to the touch. Daniel froze. He checked the date on the filter replacement tag. It had been changed less than a month ago. That alone would have been strange, but paired with the warmth of the system, it suggested recent use, or readiness for use. His rational mind searched for explanations. Perhaps the previous owner had maintained it obsessively. Perhaps it was part of some elaborate personal project. But none of those explanations accounted for the level of neutrality, the absence of personality. This place was not an expression of someone's inner world. It was a service space. He continued searching and eventually found a shallow drawer beneath the table. Inside lay a thin notebook, its cover plain and unmarked. Daniel hesitated before opening it, aware that this object represented a threshold of a different kind. The moment he read what was inside, speculation would turn into knowledge. The pages were filled with dates and times. No names, no descriptions. Just entries, consistent in format, arrival, departure, duration. Occasionally a brief note, quiet, clean, filter, reset. Daniel's breath slowed as he flipped through the pages. The handwriting changed subtly over time, suggesting more than one person had made entries, but all adhered to the same structure. This was a log, not a diary, documentation, not reflection. He sat down in the chair, notebook resting in his hands, and allowed the full implication to take shape. This room was not used to hide from danger. It was used to create absence, to make someone disappear briefly, convincingly, without anyone needing to know where they had gone. The efficiency of it was what disturbed him most. There was no excess, no cruelty, no indulgence, just function. He imagined the kind of people who might need such a space. Not fugitives, not criminals on the run. People with lives that required careful management. People whose presence at certain moments could complicate things. People who needed to not be seen, not be reachable, not be accountable, if only for a short time. Daniel closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. He stood and tested the soundproofing again, this time more thoroughly. He clapped, spoke, even shouted briefly. Nothing escaped. The room absorbed sound with unsettling efficiency. From above, the house would register nothing. A person could stay here for days, perhaps longer, and the world would simply adjust around their absence. As he climbed back up the stairs, sealing the panel once more, Daniel felt the house settle around him. It was the same structure, the same rooms, but its meaning had changed. He was no longer just a homeowner. He was the custodian of a mechanism. That afternoon, he sat at his desk and began copying the dates from the notebook into a digital document. He did not yet know why, only that understanding patterns might lead to understanding intent. As the list grew longer, stretching back years, he noticed something that tightened his chest. The entries were not random. They followed rhythms, weeks with no use, followed by clusters of activity. Certain months appeared repeatedly, certain days of the week. This had been part of someone's routine. As the sun set and the house grew quiet again, Daniel realized something else, something he had not allowed himself to consider until now. The room beneath his stairs was not abandoned. It had simply been waiting. Daniel waited until the house settled into its morning stillness before returning to the hidden staircase. He did not want to associate the descent with exhaustion or imagination. If he was going to understand what lay beneath his home, it had to be done with a clear mind. In daylight, when every rational explanation still felt possible, he prepared carefully, not dramatically. Gloves, a flashlight with fresh batteries, his phone fully charged. He left a note on the kitchen counter with the date and time, not because he expected something to happen, but because order had always been his way of keeping anxiety at bay. Only after these small rituals did he slide the panel aside and step once more into the opening beneath the stairs. The descent felt different this time, less shocking, more deliberate. His body remembered the steps, the slight drop in temperature, the quiet hum of air moving through unseen channels. What had startled him the night before now revealed itself more clearly. The staircase was not simply well built, it was engineered. Every angle, every material choice served a purpose. This was not the work of a homeowner with a secret hobby. It had been planned, measured, and executed by someone who understood systems. At the bottom, he paused before the padded door, listening. There was nothing to hear, and that absence itself felt intentional. When he pushed the door open and the lights came on automatically, he noted the timing. Immediate, but not abrupt. Designed to feel neutral. He moved through the room slowly, this time with the intent to catalog rather than react. The walls were covered with acoustic panels disguised as minimalist decor. They were not industrial or crude. Someone had taken care to make the space feel ordinary, even comfortable, without allowing it to feel personal. The floor was smooth, easy to clean, without rugs or textures that would hold dust or traces of use. Daniel knelt and ran a gloved hand along the baseboards. Clean, no debris, no sign of neglect. He opened a small cabinet built flush into the wall and found neatly stacked sealed packages. Bedding sets, towels, toiletries, all generic, all unbranded. Nothing that could tie the room to a specific person or time. He opened another compartment and found bottled water arranged in careful rows. Not emergency rations, not survival supplies. Just enough for a short stay. He counted without realizing it. Enough for several days, but not weeks. The bathroom confirmed his growing impression. The fixtures were modest, but modern. The shower drain was clean, the sealant fresh. This was not a forgotten space. It had been maintained, perhaps even serviced regularly. Someone had been here recently, or someone expected someone to be. The lighting control panel caught his attention next. It was more complex than he had initially noticed. Preset modes were labeled simply day, night, rest, off. Each setting adjusted not only brightness, but color temperature, mimicking the passage of time. Daniel tested them one by one, watching the room shift subtly from warm to cool. The effect was disorienting in a way that felt deliberate. This was not just a room to hide in, it was a room designed to remove a person from the outside world without drawing attention to their absence. The thought settled heavily on him. Daniel returned to the main area and noticed a narrow door he had overlooked before, concealed almost perfectly within the paneling. Behind it was a compact technical closet. Inside, he found the heart of the room's function. Filters labeled with dates, power units humming softly, backup batteries, a network of cables routed with precision, tagged and organized. Someone had built this to operate independently for limited periods. Not permanently, not indefinitely, just long enough. He noticed something else then, something small but deeply unsettling. One of the power indicators was warm to the touch. Daniel froze. He checked the date on the filter replacement tag. It had been changed less than a month ago. That alone would have been strange, but paired with the warmth of the system, it suggested recent use, or readiness for use. His rational mind searched for explanations. Perhaps the previous owner had maintained it obsessively. Perhaps it was part of some elaborate personal project. But none of those explanations accounted for the level of neutrality, the absence of personality. This place was not an expression of someone's inner world. It was a service space. He continued searching and eventually found a shallow drawer beneath the table. Inside lay a thin notebook, its cover plain and unmarked. Daniel hesitated before opening it, aware that this object represented a threshold of a different kind. The moment he read what was inside, speculation would turn into knowledge. The pages were filled with dates and times. No names, no descriptions, just entries consistent in format, arrival, departure, duration. Occasionally a brief note, quiet, clean, filter, reset. Daniel's breath slowed as he flipped through the pages. The handwriting changed subtly over time, suggesting more than one person had made entries, but all adhered to the same structure. This was a log, not a diary. Documentation, not reflection. He sat down in the chair, notebook resting in his hands, and allowed the full implication to take shape. This room was not used to hide from danger. It was used to create absence, to make someone disappear briefly, convincingly, without anyone needing to know where they had gone. The efficiency of it was what disturbed him most. There was no excess, no cruelty, no indulgence, just function. He imagined the kind of people who might need such a space, not fugitives, not criminals on the run, people with lives that required careful management, people whose presence, at certain moments, could complicate things, people who needed to not be seen, not be reachable, not be accountable, if only for a short time. Daniel closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. He stood and tested the soundproofing again, this time more thoroughly. He clapped, spoke, even shouted briefly. Nothing escaped. The room absorbed sound with unsettling efficiency. From above, the house would register nothing. A person could stay here for days, perhaps longer, and the world would simply adjust around their absence. As he climbed back up the stairs, sealing the panel once more, Daniel felt the house settle around him. It was the same structure, the same rooms, but its meaning had changed. He was no longer just a homeowner. He was the custodian of a mechanism. That afternoon, he sat at his desk and began copying the dates from the notebook into a digital document. He did not yet know why, only that understanding patterns might lead to understanding intent. As the list grew longer, stretching back years, he noticed something that tightened his chest. The entries were not random. They followed rhythms. Weeks with no use, followed by clusters of activity. Certain months appeared repeatedly, certain days of the week. This had been part of someone's routine. As the sun set and the house grew quiet again, Daniel realized something else, something he had not allowed himself to consider until now. The room beneath his stairs was not abandoned. It had simply been waiting. After the tape appeared on the fence, Daniel stopped telling himself that he was merely observing. Whatever this system was, it no longer belonged only to the past. It had a present tense, and that tense now included him. The house was no longer a passive container for hidden architecture and old records. It was a node in something that had not been properly dismantled. He began the next phase of his work cautiously, aware that curiosity alone could now place him in danger. He shifted from casual searches to structured research. Every date from the log was cross-checked against publicly available records. But this time he widened the scope. Local news was no longer enough. He searched national databases, archived court calendars, corporate disclosures, regulatory filings, and even obituaries. He built timelines, layering one set of events over another until the overlaps became impossible to ignore. The pattern that emerged was subtle but consistent. The people connected to the matching dates were not criminals hiding from the law, nor were they victims seeking refuge. They were professionals, executives, officials, advisors, people whose absence at a critical moment allowed something else to proceed smoothly. A contract signed without opposition, a vote postponed just long enough to change its outcome, a witness unavailable on the day their testimony mattered most. Daniel noticed that the explanations offered afterward were always ordinary: stress, illness, exhaustion, family emergencies. Society accepted these narratives instinctively, almost gratefully. No one wanted to press further when the surface explanation felt human and fragile. The system relied on that instinct, on the collective discomfort with probing personal crises. The most disturbing realization came when Daniel compared durations. Short stays aligned with missed meetings or delayed appearances. Longer stays coincided with periods where decisions were finalized in the absence of dissent. The room was not used randomly, it was deployed strategically. As he worked, Daniel felt a creeping sense of recognition. Not recognition of the people involved, but of the logic behind it all. He had spent years in environments where outcomes were shaped less by action than by the careful removal of obstacles, where silence at the right moment carried more weight than argument. The room beneath his house was not an anomaly. It was a physical manifestation of a mindset he already knew too well. Late one evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Daniel reached a name that made him stop. It was not a famous name, not one that would mean anything to most people, but it belonged to a consultant whose work Daniel had once followed closely, a man who had quietly shaped several high-profile corporate restructurings. The date of the consultant's unexplained absence aligned perfectly with a decisive merger that had eliminated a competing firm overnight. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. This was no longer abstract. The system had touched worlds adjacent to his own. He returned to the room beneath the stairs with a new sense of urgency. He needed to know how deeply the house itself was embedded in this network. He examined the technical closet again, this time focusing not on maintenance, but on communication. The wiring suggested that at one point, the room had been connected to external systems. The connections were no longer active, but they had not been removed. They had been capped, preserved, ready to be reactivated. In the same concealed compartment where he had found the instruction sheets, Daniel discovered a thin folder he had somehow overlooked. Inside were printed schedules, each bearing the same minimalist formatting as the log. These schedules listed times and preparation notes, but no addresses, no names, only roles: client, handler, reset. One page included a note written in a different hand: temporary relocation approved, ownership transfer pending, continue protocol. Daniel sat on the stairs for a long time, the folder resting in his hands. The meaning was clear. The sale of the house had not disrupted the system. It had been part of its maintenance. By transferring ownership, the network reduced its visibility while keeping the infrastructure intact. He began to notice changes outside as well. A car parked down the street for longer than usual, its driver never visible. A man walking his dog past the house twice a day, always slowing near the driveway. A service van that stopped briefly one morning, then drove away without anyone getting out. None of these things were overt threats. Each was plausible on its own. Together they formed a perimeter. Daniel realized that the system did not operate through violence. It operated through presence and implication, through the quiet assertion that someone was paying attention. The next discovery came by accident. While reviewing digital backups of the log, Daniel noticed a discrepancy between the handwritten entries and the indentation marks left on the pages. There were entries that had been written and then removed entirely, not erased but physically extracted. The pattern of missing pages corresponded to the most sensitive overlaps, the ones involving irreversible outcomes. He understood then that the log itself was only a partial record, a surface layer. The real documentation had likely been removed and relocated, perhaps even digitized and distributed among multiple holders. The house was not the archive. It was the interface. That night, Daniel received his first direct intrusion. It came not as a message, but as an absence. His internet connection went down for exactly 45 minutes, then returned without explanation. During that time, his phone displayed full signal, but failed to load anything. No error messages, no alerts, just silence. When the connection returned, there was no trace of disruption, no service notifications, no dropped logs. It was as if the outage had never occurred. Daniel did not sleep. The following morning, he found a small envelope tucked neatly into the gap between the front door and its frame. It contained no note, only a single printed sheet. On it was a date. One of the future dates he had already seen inside the hidden envelope beneath the stairs. The message was unmistakable. The system was not only active, it was moving forward according to schedule. Daniel understood now that he was standing at the edge of a role he had never applied for. By buying the house, he had not inherited its history. He had inherited its position. The system did not need his consent. It needed only his silence, his inaction, his willingness to treat what he had found as an anomaly rather than a responsibility. As he placed the printed date next to the others, arranging them in order, Daniel faced a truth he could no longer avoid. The room beneath his stairs had not been built to disappear people forever. It was built to make accountability disappear at precisely the moments when it mattered most. And now, whether he wanted it or not, the system was testing whether he would allow it to continue doing exactly that. The envelope at the door changed something fundamental in Daniel's understanding of the situation. Until that moment, the system had felt reactive, watchful, adjusting itself to his presence. Now it revealed something colder and more unsettling. It operated forward, it planned, it assumed continuity. He placed the printed date on the kitchen table alongside the slips he had already found beneath the stairs. Seen together, they formed a sequence, evenly spaced, methodical. There was no ambiguity left about their purpose. These were not reminders or relics. They were appointments. Daniel spent the rest of the day dismantling any remaining illusion that this was a dormant operation. He returned to the hidden room and re-examined every component with the knowledge that someone, somewhere, expected it to be ready again. The ventilation system responded instantly when powered on. The lighting presets activated without delay. The backup batteries showed full charge, replaced recently enough to retain maximum capacity. Nothing had been left to decay. The system had not been abandoned. It had been parked. As night fell, Daniel discovered something else he had previously overlooked. Behind the technical closet, concealed within the framing, was a narrow compartment containing a sealed folder. It was thinner than the others, almost an afterthought, and its placement suggested it was meant to be found only by someone looking very carefully. Inside was a letter. It was typed, printed on unmarked paper, and written in neutral, almost courteous language. There was no greeting, no signature. It did not introduce itself, nor did it explain the origins of the system. It assumed knowledge. The letter outlined expectations. The new owner was advised not to modify structural elements beneath the staircase. Maintenance access would be required on predetermined dates. Cooperation would ensure privacy and stability. Interference would lead to complications, described vaguely, but with unsettling confidence. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. The language was not threatening in the conventional sense. There were no consequences listed, no explicit warnings. Instead, it framed compliance as the simplest path, the most reasonable choice. The tone suggested that resistance was not immoral or criminal, merely inconvenient. This, Daniel realized, was how the system exerted pressure, not through fear, but through inevitability. Over the following days, the pressure intensified in subtle ways. A notice arrived from the city questioning minor discrepancies in property records. A utility inspector requested access to parts of the house that had never previously required review. None of these events were dramatic, and each had a plausible explanation. But their timing was too precise, too coordinated. Daniel began documenting everything. He created copies of the letter, the dates, the logs, and the instruction sheets, storing them both digitally and physically in separate locations. He did not trust any single method of preservation. Redundancy became his shield. At the same time, he felt the psychological weight of isolation settling in. He could not speak freely to friends or neighbors without risking attention. He could not go to authorities without exposing himself as the owner of an illegal structure whose purpose he could not yet prove. The system thrived in this gray space, where accountability dissolved under uncertainty. One evening, as Daniel returned home, he noticed that the tape on the fence had been replaced. Same position, same height, a different color. It was a confirmation, not a warning. Someone had checked. Someone had found everything acceptable. That night, he sat in the hidden room with the lights set to neutral, allowing the silence to press in on him the way it must have pressed in on those who had used the space before. He tried to imagine their thoughts, their justifications. Perhaps some believed they were protecting their families. Others may have convinced themselves that absence was harmless, that nothing truly bad resulted from stepping away at the right moment. But Daniel had seen the consequences in the records. Deals finalized without opposition. Decisions made in the absence of dissent. Truth delayed until it lost its force. The system did not create evil. It simply removed resistance. As the next scheduled date approached, Daniel noticed increased activity around the house. The parked car returned. The dog walker lingered longer. A courier knocked one afternoon, claiming to have the wrong address, yet studying Daniel's face carefully before leaving. The message was clear. The system was preparing to resume operation, and Daniel's role was expected to be passive. The final confirmation came 2 nights before the date. His internet connection failed again, this time for exactly 1 hour. When it returned, a single file appeared on his desktop, unannounced and unexplained. It contained only a checklist: ventilation, lighting, cleanliness, access. Daniel closed the file without opening it again. He understood now that the sale of the house had never been an exit strategy. It was a transfer of liability. The previous owner had stepped away cleanly, leaving Daniel to absorb the risk, the scrutiny, and the moral burden. The system had calculated that a new owner would either comply quietly or become an isolated problem, easily neutralized through administrative pressure. What it had not accounted for was Daniel's refusal to see the situation as merely personal. In the early hours of the morning, he made his decision. He would not destroy the evidence, nor would he allow the system to proceed unchallenged, but he also would not confront it directly. Direct confrontation was what the system anticipated. It was prepared for resistance that could be labeled irrational or illegal. Instead, Daniel began to prepare something else. He organized his files into multiple sealed packages, each addressed not to a single authority, but to different points of exposure. Journalists who specialized in long investigations, regulatory offices with overlapping jurisdictions, legal aid organizations experienced in whistleblower protection. He did not send anything yet. Timing mattered. As dawn broke, Daniel stood at the base of the staircase, looking at the concealed panel beneath it. The house was quiet, ordinary, indistinguishable from any other on the street. No one passing by would suspect what lay beneath. The system believed it controlled time. It believed it could schedule absence, manage visibility, and dictate outcomes by simply deciding when someone should not be present. Daniel intended to test whether that belief could survive a different kind of presence. The date on the envelope drew closer, and with it, the moment when the system would expect the house to open itself once more. Daniel would be ready. The morning of the scheduled date arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no confrontations, no sudden disruptions to announce its importance. The house woke as it always did, filled with clean light and the low, steady breath of conditioned air moving through its hidden channels. If not for the papers laid out on the kitchen table and the quiet vigilance Daniel carried within him, the day might have passed unnoticed. He moved through the house deliberately, performing ordinary tasks with measured calm. Coffee brewed, windows were opened and closed again. The routine was not an attempt at denial, but preparation. He needed his actions to remain unremarkable, to give the system nothing it could label as erratic or provocative. The system did not fear emotion. It feared documentation and sequence. Daniel checked the hidden room one final time. Everything functioned as expected. Ventilation responded. Lighting shifted according to preset modes. The room was clean, reset, neutral. It was ready to be used exactly as the checklist had demanded. That readiness, he understood, was the trap. Compliance required nothing more than allowing inertia to carry the day forward. He sat on the stairs and reviewed the evidence he had assembled. The log, copied and indexed. The instruction sheets. The letter that outlined expectations without ever acknowledging responsibility. The future dates, now reduced to a single imminent one. The patterns of coincidence that could no longer be dismissed as chance. All of it formed a narrative that did not accuse directly, but demonstrated function. a system that did not need to explain itself because it had never been challenged. Daniel's decision was not born of anger or righteousness. It emerged from a quieter place, shaped by the knowledge that silence, in this case, was not neutral. Silence was participation. The system had been built to exploit the space between action and accountability. It thrived in that gap, relying on the assumption that no single individual would accept the cost of stepping into it. By purchasing the house, Daniel had been placed precisely where such an assumption could be tested. He did not intend to confront whoever arrived directly. That would invite escalation, force the system into a defensive posture it was designed to handle. Instead, he would let the day unfold while altering the conditions under which it would be observed. At precisely the hour listed on the envelope, Daniel received a notification on his phone. Not a message, not a call. A brief loss of signal, lasting only seconds, followed by its return. A silent knock, delivered through infrastructure rather than contact. He acknowledged it by doing nothing. Minutes later, a car pulled into the driveway. It was not the same vehicle Daniel had seen lingering on the street before, but that was expected. The system valued redundancy. The driver exited calmly, dressed in a way that suggested neither urgency nor concealment. He approached the front door and rang the bell once. Daniel opened the door. The man introduced himself politely, offering a reason for his visit that was plausible and incomplete. Maintenance, inspection, routine access. The words were chosen carefully, their ambiguity a feature rather than a flaw. Daniel listened without interruption, then nodded and stepped aside. They moved through the house together, the visitor's gaze professional and unfazed. He did not rush, did not hesitate, and did not ask questions beyond what was necessary to confirm access. When they reached the staircase, Daniel stopped. "There's something you should know," Daniel said quietly. The man turned attentive but guarded. Daniel did not accuse. He did not explain. He handed the man a sealed envelope. Inside were copies, not originals, enough to establish context without revealing the full extent of what Daniel possessed. Dates, procedures, photographs, the system's own language presented back to it without commentary. The man read quickly, his expression shifting only slightly. Recognition passed across his face, followed by calculation. He closed the envelope and looked at Daniel with measured composure. "This doesn't have to be complicated," the man said. Daniel met his gaze evenly. "It already is." The conversation ended there. The man left without entering the hidden room. The car drove away. There were no threats, no raised voices, no immediate consequences. The system did not escalate. It withdrew. Daniel knew better than to interpret that withdrawal as retreat. Within hours, he began executing the final phase of his plan. He did not send all the evidence to a single recipient. He distributed it across multiple channels, each chosen for its independence and resilience. Investigative journalists received anonymized packages timed to arrive simultaneously. Regulatory bodies received documentation framed as a compliance concern rather than an accusation. Legal organizations specializing in whistleblower protection received a summary that emphasized structure over scandal. He staggered the releases carefully, not enough to provoke panic, but enough to prevent containment. By evening, subtle signs of disruption appeared. The parked car did not return. The tape on the fence was gone. Daniel's internet connection remained stable. The house felt lighter, though he knew that feeling was subjective, unreliable. News would not break immediately. The system was too quiet, too careful for sudden exposure. But Daniel did not need spectacle. He needed persistence. In the days that followed, inquiries began. Polite requests for clarification, notices of review, questions framed as routine audits. The system responded as it always had, by attempting to absorb the disturbance without revealing its core. But this time, the disturbance came from multiple directions at once. Daniel remained in the house through it all, documenting, responding only when necessary, refusing to embellish. He did not grant interviews. He did not seek validation. His role was not to persuade, but to provide continuity. Eventually, the hidden room beneath the stairs went dark. The ventilation system powered down. The lighting controls ceased responding, not through sabotage, but through disengagement. The system had decided the location was no longer efficient. A month later, Daniel found a new listing online. A different house, in a different city, with a familiar phrasing in its description. Ideal for privacy, motivated seller. He closed the browser window. The story did not end with arrests or confessions. That had never been the system's weakness. Its weakness was exposure over time, the slow erosion of invisibility. Daniel had not destroyed it. He had forced it to move, to adapt, to carry its weight forward rather than leaving it buried beneath someone else's staircase. One evening, as he prepared to leave the house for good, Daniel paused at the base of the stairs. The panel beneath them was still concealed, still intact. The space it hid was empty now, its purpose suspended. He understood then that the room had never been the true center of the system. It was only a tool. The real mechanism existed in the willingness of people to disappear when it benefited them, and in the structures that made such disappearances easy to excuse. Daniel locked the door behind him and walked away without looking back. Somewhere else, another room might already be waiting, but this one at least would no longer be silent. If this story kept you watching, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Check out the next video on your screen and explore other stories on the channel. Share this video with someone who loves mysteries like this and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If you want a shorter or more intense version, I can adjust the tone.